We're going to go ahead and get started because I've found that if you start, it makes the people who were going to arrive after you've gone a couple pages. So with that, I call the meeting to order. Thank you for being here tonight. And I'll ask Sue if she would take the roll call.
Councillor McBride,
Here.
Councillor Mildenberger,
Here.
Elise is absent. Oop, that one's District 2 is vacant. Mayor Rogers,
Here.
Councillor Bacon, Councillor Finley,
Here.
Raquel Peregrino de Brito,
Here.
Greg Minahan, Molly Olson,
Here.
Lozelle Mathai, Brad Sitton, Ted Abora,
Here.
Steph St. Cyr,
Here.
and Robert Cross.
Thank you, Sue. Tonight, we're going to go through training on the budget and get geared up for our budget meeting. So with that, let me turn it over to Katie and off you go.
Awesome. So thank you all for being here. Sue, will you pull up my PowerPoint when you get a chance? I know there's kind of a mix of people who've been seasoned budget committee members and some new members. So the training will have kind of a mix of review stuff for everybody and then some new information, and there'll be some information on the city as well. So I'll wait for Sue to get my presentation up. I'm ready to go. No. No. The joys of PowerPoint. All right, can you go to the next slide? All right, so I just wanted to give the committee a brief update on ARPA and where we're at with that. So we have a lot of MOUs in process, and then some we don't even have MOUs started with. So I didn't include those on here, but to date, some of the newer ones that we've issued since the last ARPA meeting, we have the Chehalem Valley Commerce, Nurture Newberg, Ruddock Wood, Coffee Cat, and then today Elise came and picked up the Harvest House check, which is not on this list because this is hot off the press. So this is where we're at today, and then our first ARPA compliance report is due this Friday. So we've been working on that and getting all of that spent. So we have to submit a preliminary budget, and then we have to submit what we have spent as of March 30th. I just wanted to give the committee an update on where we're at with ARPA. So next slide.
I do hear there are certain counties that haven't yet got the money out, so good job.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, very much. And so then I just want to kind of go over our agenda for tonight. I'm going to go over what local budget law is, what a budget is and who creates the budget, the different fund types we have at the city and how we can spend out of them, some of the spending priorities we used when we were creating this budget. I wanted to address the structural deficit issue that I know has been floating around. And then I kind of wanted to go over just general budget committee process and then budget committee roles for the members. Next slide, Sue. And then I wanted to remind the council and the committee of the city council's goals, which we try and take into consideration when we build the budget. So council has a goal for customer service, diversity, equity, and inclusion, affordable housing, the urban renewal, and then sustainability. Next slide. So what is local budget law? So local budget law establishes standard procedures for municipalities. It outlines programs and fiscal policies. It requires you to have estimates on resources and requirements, which are revenues and expenses. It encourages citizen involvement, and it controls spending of public funds. Next slide. And why do we have to follow local budget law? So a city that doesn't follow local budget law may not lawfully expend their money or certify property taxes to the county assessor. So basically, if we don't follow local budget law, we really can't spend our appropriations. It's as simple as that. Next slide, please. And what is a budget? A budget is a financial plan, generally for one fiscal year, although there are the 2 fiscal year biannual budgets. And usually it's from July 1 to June 30th, because that's what all governments have for their fiscal year end. And it's based on a good faith estimate of revenues and expenditures. So basically that means that you want to get into your budget everything that you think is going to happen for that fiscal year. You don't want to do wild guesses on, oh, maybe this is going to come in, or maybe we're going to spend that. It wants to be what you know it's going to be. And according to Oregon budget law, there are 2 types of ways you can budget for your expenditures. You can budget either by organizational level or by program level. So program level is what we do in the budget. So that's where you'll see the whole program. You'll see the appropriation line of like police, library, municipal court, versus the organizational level, which is like personnel, services, materials and services, capital outlay. So that wouldn't be quite as detailed for our level because you wouldn't see it broken down by department. So that's why we choose to do program level. And the budget is the basis for appropriations, which creates the authority to spend the public money. Next slide. And who creates the proposed budget? The proposed budget is created by the budget officer, who is responsible for compiling the information from stakeholders and other sources to develop the proposed budget. And we would like the proposed budget to be in line with council goals, core values and strategies, objectives established by leadership, known obligations, and of course, Oregon budget law. Next slide, please. So what goes into creating the budget? So very first thing you want to do is figure out your fund balance. So you want to get an estimate of where you're going to be at the end of the current fiscal year, because that's going to be your beginning number for the next fiscal year, which I'll talk about more in a second. And then you want to determine your revenue projections, which are based on known revenues you always get. So for us, that would be state shared revenue, property taxes, and all of that. So you know what you can spend essentially. Next slide, please. So for beginning fund balance, so you want to go through, in order to figure out where you're going to end this fiscal year, you want to go through and you want to create, figure out exactly what you're going to get this year reasonably, and reasonably what you're going to spend, so that you know how much cash you have on hand to begin the next fiscal year with. Because whatever you end with is going to be what you start with next year. That's your baseline reserve. Next slide, please. And then once you have your baseline to start with for beginning fund balance, you want to go through your known revenue sources. So for Newberg, these are some of our known revenue sources. So we have obviously beginning fund balance. Then we have our state shared revenue, which is going to be our liquor, cigarette, and marijuana tax apportionment that we get directly from the state, from their taxes on those. Then we have property taxes, which generally is a baseline of 3% increase each year, but that can vary depending on properties that are coming on the tax roll and development that's happening within your city. So you kind of want to look at that and see what's going on there, because that could be much higher than 3% if you have a lot of development happening. Then we have revenue contracts, which are franchise fees. We also have a police contract with the city of Dundee, as well as planning contracts. We have grants. So like you all know, we have the ARPA grant. And then we also have the body worn camera grant. And then we've also received grant from Yamhill County from their ARPA funds. Then we also have fines and fees, which are going to be our traffic fees, court fees, library fees, planning fees, building permit fees, all of those. Then we have our utility rates, which are water, sewer, stormwater, transportation, public safety fee, and communication officer fee, which you see on your municipal utility statement. Then we also have SDCs, which are system development charges that we get from developers who want to change existing utility structure. And then we're able to bank those revenues for future new development of those utilities. And then we have interest on investment. So we're very fortunate to have high cash balances here. So we get very good returns on our interest on investment. And with the market looking like the interest rates are going to go up, that's going to be good news for us because we'll be earning more money on our cash. And then we also have other miscellaneous revenues, forensic services, the CCRLS contract through the library, and then other miscellaneous sale of assets, like sale of vehicles, that sort of thing. Next slide. So once you have your revenues in and you have your beginning fund balance, then you're able to figure out how much you have to spend. And so that's when you're going to add in your known expenditures and your known expenditure increases as well. And you also want to add in other obligations that you might already know you have, like debt requirements, required transfers, any contracts that are going to carry over to the next year. Next slide, please. So for expenditures, your biggest expense of any municipality is going to be payroll costs. That's a huge part of your city's expenses. So that's going to be salary, any step increases, any COLAs, pension increases, so PERS and NERPs, health insurance, workers' comp insurance. All of those are going to be a huge portion of your expenses each year. Then you have to look at your materials and professional services. So that's going to be your maintenance agreements that you have each year that carry over, that are going to have nominal rate increases each year. Your legal fees, like we do with Miller Nash, where we have a contract, our audit contracts, anything like that that you know is going to carry over from one fiscal year to the next. Then we have our capital outlay, which is going to be our ongoing capital projects that we know we're scheduled to do in the next fiscal year, or maybe some that didn't end from the past fiscal year. So you want to make sure to put those in. Any debt requirements. So those are going to carry over from your debt schedules that you'll have known amounts that you're going to be paying. Budgeted transfers, where certain funds have to transfer into other funds for various reasons. So you'll want to make sure you have those budgeted in for. And then just any other contractual obligations extending beyond the current fiscal year. Next slide. So some new known expenditures for Newberg that we've taken into consideration for the budget. So we have a class and compensation study in progress right now. And unfortunately, we started it in November as soon as Will got on, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be done in time for the budget. So that'll probably be something that has to be a supplemental budget next year sometime. Hopefully early, like August, September, but right now we have a placeholder COLA in there that we're hoping will cover the whole cost of the comp study overall. But it's a known expenditure that we're trying to, be prepared for. Then we have other labor negotiations going on. This year, we had the Police Association contract that's been approved by both parties and Miller Nash, and it's advancing to council on Monday, actually. So we have known COLA amounts for that we've added into the budget. AFSCME had their contract last year negotiated, and we have known COLA amounts for that will also be included in the budget. Council recently passed the urban renewal. So we have known professional services related to that we've budgeted for. Normally there's a separate budget for the urban renewal, but we're not quite at that point yet where it's going to be up and running. So that'll probably be the fiscal year after next, hopefully. But for now, we just have professional services budgeted. Then of course we have our pension rates. So for the new people, NERPS is the Newberg Employee Retirement Pension Plan. So Newberg is very special where we have two pensions. So before 2016, we had employees who were enrolled in this Nurbs plan. It's no longer available to enter into, but it's still a cost. And without new people coming into the plan, the costs on that are very high to continue that to go. So we have rate increases yearly for that to keep that sustainable. And then PERS is actually on a biannual rate increase. So next year is going to be the same as this year, but the following year will be the rate increase for PERS. So we've factored in those rates. Our health insurance through CIS, we have all of those in. Luckily, they were not massive rate increases, but we still factored those in. And then rate review committee commenced this year and recommended some annual rate increases for the utilities. So based on that revenue that we're anticipating receiving, we based our capital projects for the next fiscal year off of what we're going to receive. Next slide, please. So next, I kind of want to switch and talk about fund balance. So there are 5 categories of classifications which make up the total ending fund balance. So first you have non-spendable, which is exactly what it says. They're not in a spendable form. So that's either prepaid or inventory that you have on the books. Then there are restricted fund balances, which again are exactly what it says. They are restricted by outside parties, such as grantors or government regulations or debt covenants that restrict that money. Then we have committed funds, which are limited to that specific purpose through a council resolution. So that would be limited to by this governing body. Then assigned is very similar, but it's a little bit less authoritative. So it would be delegated by a city official or the governing body, just in a different way that's less authoritative than a resolution. And then we have unassigned, which is available for any purpose. So that's essentially your play money. Next slide. So you can see on here, this is a list of all of our funds and their fund balance classification. So really the only one that has anything that you can use for any specific purpose is the general fund. That's unassigned. And with the exception of some inventory that lives in the street fund, which is the non-spendable, and the economic development fund, which has some council resolution committed funds, everything else is restricted, either by debt covenants, through a grant, or through government regulations. So I get that question often, like, oh, the water fund has a lot of money. How come we can't just transfer that into the general fund? This is why we can't transfer it in, because the funds are restricted by how the revenue was generated. Next slide, please. And similar to that, we have the different types of funds. So we have the general fund, which is again for general use or unrestricted use. We have special revenue funds, which are for restricted purposes. We have capital projects funds, which can only hold capital projects. We have debt service funds, which are only for debt payments. We have proprietary funds, which there are 2 types of proprietary funds. There are internal service funds, which are essentially a cost reimbursement to other funds. So that's how our administrative services fund works. So we charge the other funds for those administrative services into that Fund 31. So it's like a repayment for those services. And then we have the enterprise funds, which work as a business type fund because we charge external customers for the city. So those would be like our utility funds, the water fund, the sewer, stormwater. And then we have the non-operating funds. So non-operating funds, they don't have any sort of payroll, materials and services, capital outlay. Their only purpose is to generate revenue and to transfer out to another fund. And those would be our SDC funds. Next slide. So again, here's our list of funds, and you can just see the different classifications on each fund and the purpose they serve on that. As you can see, we have quite a mix of everything. Next slide. So I wanted to talk about the spending priorities that Newberg used when looking at the budget this year. So our main priority was really preserving the existing resources that we had. This is just so important because, we want to try and live within our means. Cost of living is going up, inflation is going up, but our revenue sources are really not going up yet. So we're trying to really preserve as much as we can in order to save our fund balances for future expenses. Capital improvements and planning for future capital improvements. As you all heard from ARPA, things have not been thought out in the past about planning for the future, for future purchases. So we're really trying to make a plan for future capital purchases that need to happen. So we've sat down with each department and we've made plans on how much money we need to be allocating each year to the department so that they can bank it and roll it forward to make these big purchases in the future. And each one of them has taken ownership of, okay, so if I have to make this purchase in 5 years, I'm going to need to save this much money in order to make that purchase in 5 years so that we're not just in a position. Yeah.
So this is actually very critical, this part, because this was a process that had not been happening previously, where we actually made each of them make a depreciation table to understand the longevity of their equipment And that's where these capital numbers come from.
Yeah, so we really wanted to focus on not being in that position again, because frankly, without the ARPA money, we would not be in the financial position we're in today. And then investing in employees is a big one. We've had a lot of turnover in the last year just because of the market, and it's extremely difficult to recruit new employees. And frankly, the people that we're getting on the recruitments don't have the same level of experience as the people who've left. So we're really trying to make Newberg a better place to work. And we want to do that through the class and comp study, try and look at reevaluating the benefits we offer, just so that we're not losing all of our people who are talented. You know, and when somebody leaves, it's a lot of training that has left with them. And then when somebody new starts, it's a lot more training, and time is money. So it's difficult. Tourism promotion, it's starting to look like things are back to almost pre-COVID time. So when the businesses are booming, then we get our TLT money in the general fund. So that's good news for us. And again, kind of going with the first one, this was very much a status quo budget. So we went through and everybody got the same amount of money as they got last year for each line item, unless they asked for it for a specific purpose. And so if they said, oh, a maintenance agreement is going up 3%, okay. But everything else was going to be exactly the same as last year unless they asked for it, because we're trying to keep our costs low. Next slide. These are some of our position vacancies that we currently have. Some of this might be outdated now because it changes all the time. We're currently in the process for a city manager. Sorry, were you gonna say something, Molly? No, okay.
I was wincing for Jeff when I looked down the list. Sorry.
I know, yeah. So we're currently in the process for hiring a city manager. We're hoping to recruit again for a human resources manager, but that was a no-go earlier this year when we recruited. We're looking for a plans examiner too. We're trying still again to recruit for a senior planner and financial analyst, but those have been very tough to recruit for. IT system administrator, that is Ian's old position since he moved into the manager role. We're trying to backfill his position. There are 3 vacancies for police officers due to retirements this year. And then there are 4 communication officer positions due to people leaving, but they have several interviews right now. So hopefully those will get filled. And then we're recruiting again for the engineering associate, which we did not have luck for in the past. And we're currently recruiting for the utility tech 2 and an operator 1 position. Next slide. So now I kind of want to talk more about the structural deficit issue that we've all heard about. So I wanted to talk about different metrics that you use to determine if you do have a structural deficit and all of those things that go with it. So there are 3 different metrics that are generally used by cities to determine whether or not there are sufficient reserves in the general fund for this. So the first one is percentage of revenues. And I'm on the City of Sherwood's budget committee, for those who don't know. This is the metric that they use. And I know other cities like Lake Oswego and Westland also use this metric. There's also the percentage of requirements, which is the League of Oregon Cities recommendation method that they use. And then there's also 3 months of payroll expenses. This one is used more often by larger cities like City of Portland, City of Salem, just because they have a larger portion of payroll on their expenditures, just because they have more middle management in there. So payroll is just a much larger portion of their expenses. So that one is a better metric, usually for bigger cities. Next slide. So metric 1, the percentage of revenues. The goal for this is to have a minimum of 20% of operating revenues in the ending fund balance in the general fund. So for this year, the estimated ending fund balance at June 30th, we're estimating to be about 4.3 million. And the total general fund revenues we're budgeting for next year are 12.3 million. So as you can see, our ending fund balance is about 35% of our general fund revenue. And this is important because you want to have a good chunk of revenue when you start the fiscal year, because certain revenues may not come in, like property tax revenue, grants. So this is a good metric, and we're doing very well based on this metric. Next slide. So metric 2 is the percentage of requirements. So the goal is to have a minimum of 10% of requirements in contingency and reserves in the general fund. So if you take the contingency and reserves we have in the budget for next year, which is 2.5 million, and divide it by the expenditures and transfers out in the budget, which is 14.1 and 496,000, you'll see that our percentage is 17%, which is really pretty good. The recommendation is that once you go over 20%, you should start really spending down back to the 20% because your goal is ultimately to serve the city and to serve the citizens. And you don't want to be too fiscally conservative with your fund balance. So 20% is ultimately the highest you want to be on that. So 17% is really pretty good. Next slide. Okay, thanks. And then metric 3 is 3 months of payroll. So your goal is to have a minimum of 3 months of payroll in reserves or ending fund balance in the general fund. So again, our estimated ending fund balance at June 30th is 4.3 million. And 1 month of payroll is just shy of 1.4 million. It's like 1.399. So I rounded up. So 1.4 million times 3 months is 4.2 million. So again, we're pretty spot on with this metric as well. And it's important to remember on this one too, the general fund only pays for about 50% of our payroll because we have the street, the water, the wastewater, Fund 31 administrative services. All of those also pay for payroll. So this is also very good. Next slide. So here's a chart of a 10-year look back on the general fund ending fund balance. So with the exception of 2020, where we took about $1 million hit in our fund balance, it's been a pretty steady increase over the last 10 years on our fund balance. So this is great. And if we were in a structural deficit, it would actually be the opposite. We would be steadily declining over the past 10 years. So based on all three of these metrics and this graph, we're actually in a pretty good financial position overall. Like we're not overly high, but we're pretty much on the higher end of good. Yes.
Current management does not know why this narrative has been repeated in the past so often about a structural deficit.
Katie, can I just,
Yeah.
so on the one that you showed before on the payroll, if half of the payroll is actually being paid by street funds, et cetera, isn't our number that much better?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they always just recommend that it's in your general fund because it's unrestricted money. But yeah, it's actually better for us because we pay for more of it out of other funds.
I just have one wish
Yeah.
tonight. I wish Robert Suppy were here. He's been saying it for years. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. So next slide, please.
I'll have to say it's Robert Suppy among others. There are others that have been saying the same thing for years.
Oh, maybe. Okay, so while we're in a very good financial position today, which is good, there are a lot of future expenses that are upcoming that we want to try and preserve our reserves for. So the first big one being the water treatment plant that we're going to be financing in 2025. So basically, the more reserves we have, the better bond rating we're going to get. So we're really trying to save because we want to get the best bond rating possible. And also, I only recently learned from Russ, who will be explaining to you at council, there is the lead and copper rule revision coming up that could take away a lot of money in our water fund. So that will be less money for our water treatment plant than we were expecting. So that's also something to consider. We have our PERS bond expiring in 2027. So for those of you who don't know how PERS bond works, it's basically a rate buy down of the rates. So it's kind of like when you do a mortgage on your house, they have where you can pay a lump sum to get a lower mortgage rate. So that works very similar to that. So we basically have bought down our PERS rates for the last 25 years, and it's going to be expiring in 2027. So when that happens, we're going to have about a 5% increase right off the bat for our PERS, which is going to be pretty huge for us. And unfortunately, PERS bonds are unlike any other bond. They're very dependent on the market. So basically it has to be just like it was in 2019, 2021, 2022, where interest rates are really low, but the market returns are really high. That's when you want to do a PERS bond because they're all based on market returns. So unfortunately, we've kind of missed the boat on doing a PERS bond, but whether or not we'll have a chance before 2027 to do another one on our UAL portion. Yes.
Can you explain this a little bit more? Did we basically, we took out, when was this, like how many years ago did they take this?
I
bond
think it
out?
was like 2002.
2002, okay.
Yeah.
And they took it out basically to, was it money to help pay the increase that's going on in PERS? Instead of us budgeting for it, we took out a bond to pay for it? Is that how it
Yes.
works?
So we know that PERS rates are going to go up. So basically we took out, I think it was like 27 million or something like that. And we knew that 27 million that we bonded was going to be cheaper than the rate increase over the next 25 years in payroll costs. So we essentially bought our rate down by 5% over the last 25 years.
Okay, so does that then come in a lump sum or is, because I don't remember seeing anything in the budget last year, but then this whole thing was so new. It still is. Does the bond come in chunks every year at budget time where they give us so much off of that bond, or does it come in one lump sum and we set it aside someplace in a fund?
Yeah, so we pay our PERS bond annually, and then we're able to reduce, so then when they send out the rates, we are able to reduce it by 5% because we have this bond that we pay. And that difference is a lot cheaper than if we had paid the higher PERS rates on all of our personnel costs. Yeah,
Are we gonna consider doing that again? I mean, it seems like to me, if it's gonna end and we're gonna get hit with a big increase, it's gonna be 5%. Then after that, the next year it will be more and more.
yes.
Is this a common thing that cities do a lot of times?
Yes. So again, this PERS bond is different than any other like construction bond or anything because it is purely based on market returns. So you have to hit it when the market is hot. You have to hit it when interest rates are low, when you go out for financing, but it's going to have big market returns because it's invested in the stock market. So it's very different than other bonds.
So with the interest rates, I just heard today,
Yes.
they're starting to go up. Housing's starting to slow down. So we missed the mark then to be able to do this.
We did. We missed the mark.
Ay, 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 okay.
And so whether or not the market will turn again before 2027, I don't know. But the PERS bonds have been hot the last 3 years.
And I have a question.
Yeah.
Would this be a bond that would go to vote?
No.
No, it's just.
Nope.
the
Yep, that's why
financial
it's so
dealing.
different. There's no voting on these bonds.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Wouldn't it just be similar to a 2022 bond though, given where the market is now, where it was in 2022, or do we know what the delta is?
Yeah, I think you have to outweigh the interest rates and then whether or not your market returns, because if we're gonna go into a recession, that's gonna affect the profitability of the bond. So then you would have been better off paying those higher PERS rates than if your bond has tanked, because then you won't get the returns you need to pay for that. So it's kind of a game, but
This is one of the things we've discussed about having a financial analyst, which is one of our hires that's coming up, is to try to think tactically about the timing of doing this again and looking at medium-term market projections to make that decision at the right time.
yeah, I mean, PERS bonds haven't been a thing since before the crash in 2008. And then they only just became a thing again in 2019.
I kind of agree with Jefferson, because I think interest rates are going to start going up probably a lot because we have borrowed, not the city, I'm talking about our nation.
Yeah,
And when we're at, over 20 trillion dollars, we've got to start paying the piper before long. So I think I would say in 3 to 4 years, you're going to see some significant interest rates. Maybe that's something we ought to really seriously look at this year. Get somebody to help us give some ideas.
This is absolutely going to be on our radar, as well as other things we need to forecast. such as the financing package for the water plant. This will all be in this year's radar.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the first things I mentioned when I got here was we should do a PERS bond, because we also, when they did it back in, I think, 2002, they only bonded a portion of the UAL, which is the unfunded actuarial liability. They didn't do the whole amount that's owed. So if you PERS bond the whole entire amount, you'll have even more of a rate reduction. So that's also something to look at as well. So I've done a PERS bond before, yeah.
Okay, so you've probably looked at this a little bit more than any of us, obviously.
Oh,
have.
yeah, I've looked at
Um,
it quite a bit.
I mean, can I just ask you just off the top of your head, what you know now? Is it smart for us to do that this year and bond the whole amount?
I think because I've been in contact with the person that I've worked with before at Piper Jaffray, the investment firm, and they have kind of said we've missed the boat on this because the market rates are anticipated to tank too soon for the bond to make the money it needs to make. So if we had done this in July or August, we would be sitting pretty. But we just missed it by a few months. Plus, it'll take about 6 months to close. That's also part of the problem. So 6 months from now, when we sell the bond and close on it, the market rate could be a lot lower.
I think another key thing to remember is that we're going to bring you data-driven decision-making now. We're not going to bring you theoretical decision-making. So whereas we may have in past times speculated about our deficit position, we will tell you what our position is. We will tell you what the threats are, and we will think about those threats in a rational way.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is a big one that's gonna hit us. Because I also think 2027 is the start of a new biennium for PERS, so they'll have their own rate increase on top of our 5%. So it's just something to think about. It's another reason we want to try and preserve what reserves we do have, because we know this is going to be an issue, but luckily we have time from now to be watching the market to see if there's a time when we can jump on another PERS bond and just try and do what we can to save up our funds for it.
You know, if I could, Katie, I mean, yeah, we could say we should have done something in July or August, but hindsight again is 2020,
yeah.
particularly with this stuff, right? So.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and then going along with that, we have the Nurbs plan. There is always a continuing solvency issue with Nurbs because we've cut off enrollment in that in 2016. And so now that we're not having people entering the plan anymore, which is good, but the more people that we have retire, then the less people we have paying into the plan. And eventually it's going to come to an issue where there's not enough people paying into it for the retirees. So currently it's been really skating through by the market returns because the market returns have been really great. But if we're going into this recession that we're expecting, then something will probably have to be looked at with Nurbs to keep it going.
Is there a way to transition to another type of fund where it's not, where this issue of not enough contributions goes away? Are there alternatives for these folks to continue to have a fund, but not with the issue of this fund ending its life cycle?
Yeah, we're kind of bouncing around all issues. So anybody who was in Nurbs became ineligible to join PERS. So that was an issue because we have lots of people here who worked here for many years and then they wouldn't be able to join PERS and then they wouldn't have their 30 years to be in PERS for their retirement. So I'm working with Miller Nash right now to figure out different ways. Some of the things that we're looking at changing are the voluntary contributions because that's affecting it, as well as the assumed rate of return. So PERS this year had to lower their assumed rate of return because they're anticipating this recession coming. And right now Nurbs is still much higher than PERS. So that's something we may have to put in line with PERS because Nurbs by law is supposed to be as good or better than PERS. So we're trying to work on that. And if we lower that, that's going to really increase the solvency for many years. But, also on the flip side to it, our pension amount that we contribute per person is almost double what we pay for PERS. Like our PERS rates are around 23% and NERPS is 51%. So it's substantially higher than PERS. So it's good that we stopped entering people into it, but also the existing ones are very costly to the city. And then, of course, the council's looking at the bypass loan to cover phase 3, which kind of goes hand in hand with the declining gas tax revenue. This was one of the first years that the state was announcing that gas tax is going to be declining due to more electric vehicles on the road. So that's something that the state is going to be reviewing because that's not looking to change anytime soon. That's actually looking to continue to decrease. And of course, they have to come up with some sort of mechanism to continue street maintenance for the future for the whole state of Oregon. So it's something just to consider that if the state doesn't move on it quick enough, the general fund may need to put budgeted revenues into the street fund.
So if we're going to summarize for these are not problems we will solve this year in the budget
No.
meeting. However, they are what are driving you guys to keep our balances up as we go forward.
Yes.
And not spend what we don't need to.
Yes, yeah, none of these are issues we have to solve today or next year, or even the year after that. It's just an ongoing issue that we're just keeping in the back of our mind as to why we want to try and preserve what resources we do have. Yeah, next slide. So, okay, so I'm really transitioning away from all of that. So if anybody had any other questions on that, we can go back to that, but no, okay. So now I'm going to focus on the budget committee roles. So who is on the budget committee? Budget committee is made up of city council plus equal number of appointed electors. And the appointed members have to be registered voters of the district. They cannot be officers, agents, or employees of the city. And we generally try and stagger them in 3-year terms so that we're not trying to fill vacancies all at once, but sometimes that doesn't work out. And then all budget committee members have the same authority on the committee. Next slide. So the budget committee meeting process. So all meetings are subject to public meeting law. And at the first meeting, which we're going to do at the next meeting, we need to elect a chair and a vice chair. Because we'll consider that our first official meeting since ARPA didn't count. And that will require a quorum to do so. And a quorum is required to conduct all business for the committee. And the committee may request and receive additional information from city officials as they wish. Next slide. So what is your role on the budget committee? Your role is to ensure that the city prepared a fair and balanced budget. And to do that, you receive the budget document, you hear the budget message, you hear and consider public comment, you discuss the budget as presented, and your main role that's really important is you approve the budget and you approve the property taxes. And things that the budget committee cannot do, they cannot set staffing levels, salaries, benefits, or contract terms. They can't decide whether or not a service or program should be funded, and they do not have the authority to make policy. And I also wanted to highlight that because the ORS states this, the budget committee may not deliberate on the budget document as a body before the first meeting. So we're going to be giving the budget out before the first budget meeting. So we just ask that you don't talk about specific estimates or appropriations, discuss different programs, or discuss any of the tax levies that are in the budget. Next slide.
Katie, so when people are reading the budget and getting ready for the first meeting, then if they have questions or need clarification, will you cover at some point the appropriate way for them to do that? Because otherwise, yeah, perfect.
Yep, that'll be at the end. So the budget is a public document once it's released to the committee, and then it must be available to the public at the same time as it is to the committee, because the public has a right to inspect the proposed budget as well. So the city must provide a means for the public to see the budget. And we're planning on doing that by putting that on our website. We're going to have physical copies at City Hall and the library. And then, of course, if anybody requests a copy of the budget, we can send it electronically or by paper. Next slide. And then the budget message really sets the stage for the budget. It's prepared under the direction of the executive officer, which for us would be the city manager. It explains the budget and describes any of the financial policies, and it explains any changes since last year, and it must be delivered in writing. You should look forward to reading Will's budget message. And it will include his photo as well. He resisted it, but it's gonna be there. Next slide. Oh, thanks. And then because the budget includes all of city council, they must be public meetings. So that means they're subject to public comment. So we must publish the date and time of the first budget committee meeting. And then we also publish a second notice for when the budget goes to council for adoption. And that one also includes a little bit more information. It's called the LB 50. So it'll include the total budget and different appropriation levels. So it has more information for the public. And any person can ask a question or comment on the budget at these public comments. And the committee is allowed to establish time limits for the public comment period. Next slide. So the main duty of the committee is really to hear the budget, determine that it's been prepared fairly, provide any recommendations, and the main duty is to approve the budget. And this is just kind of a sample motion of what you would say when you approve the budget. Next slide. And then we don't want to forget about the tax levy, because then we won't be able to collect any tax revenue. So once we're to this point, the budget committee work is finished. And we thank you for your volunteer. Next slide. So the committee is done at this point, but the budget is not. So the city will hold a budget hearing at one of their council meetings to hear the approved budget and hopefully adopt it at that committee meeting. And between the approved and adopted budget, if the governing body decides to change the budget as approved, they can withhold another they can do that without holding another budget hearing. And they don't have to republish the notice, as long as there's been no increase to taxes and there's no increase to expenditures in any fund by 10% or more. So sometimes there can be minor changes between what's been approved and what's been adopted. We try not to do that, but if there's like a clerical issue or whatever, then that you may see that happen. And then after that budget hearing, on or before June 30th, the governing body must enact a resolution to adopt the budget, make appropriations, impose each tax levy, and categorize each tax measure by category, measure 5 category. And then after this, the budget is officially done. So I wanted to talk about our future budget meetings. So we have 3 budget meetings scheduled, and I wanted to schedule things for departments for them to come. So the first meeting, I wanted to get through all of the general fund and all of administrative services fund. And I wanted to be able to complete all of those before we moved on to the May 11th meeting. So May 11th, it's going to be the public safety fees, the Fund 3, 13, and 16, the community development funds, 8, 14, and 19, and then the public works funds, 2, 6, 7, and 17. And then on the 18th, we wanted to talk about the capital projects for Fund 4 and 18, all of the SDC funds, and then just some of the miscellaneous funds that go quick, the debt service, the library foundation, ARPA, and then have a general discussion of the budget and then approve the budget on the 3rd meeting. Next slide. And so from that schedule, we were hoping if you reviewed those funds that are going to be presented on that committee, if you had specific questions when you were reviewing it, if you could submit it to us by these dates. So for the May 4th meeting, if you had questions on the general fund or administrative services, if you submitted it to us by May 3rd at noon, then we would have sufficient time to get things prepared and get personnel that was needed to be at the meeting ready, just so we kind of knew what questions the committee had ahead of time for those. And same thing for the rest of the meeting. And again, the budget will be released to you guys on the 29th, this Friday. We're going to deliver them to your house so you have a paper copy. And then if you wish to have an electronic copy, just let me know and I can send the PDF as well.
Katie, if I could, just on the,
Yeah.
so any questions directed to you and Will, or is that how they should go?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
thank you.
please. I forgot that part. Thank you.
And all those questions have to come back to this session. They don't-
Yes.
They don't get answered offline.
Yes, yeah, I'll bring them back. I just wanted to, in case you were like, oh, I want to see an analysis of this fund. That way I would have time
Or
to
a
do it.
history of a levy or something. It would all have to come back here in order.
Yes.
To review.
Over many years of government service, I've been to many of these hearings, usually as a department head. And I've noticed the way that often questions are pepper potted in, which doesn't give staff time to actually have a proper explanation. And by following these deadlines, we will answer your questions with the very best that we can.
And if you read it and you come in and then in the course of discussion, you have a question, of course, you're going to ask the question.
Right.
And if they can't answer it thoughtfully, they will bring it back the next time. So it's just a matter of the more we can arm the city, the better they will be able to serve us. So.
Yeah, if you just had any dying questions when you were reading it, let us know. Next slide. And then just some general items to take into consideration when you're reviewing the budget. Again, this was a status quo budget. So you'll see on there, again, the line items will be exactly the same as they were last year, except for personnel. But for the materials and services, unless they specifically asked for it, it's going to be the same as last year. And they had to justify it to us with a reasoning as to why it needed to increase. Because we're trying to plan ahead for these future expenses. So we're trying to keep our costs low. Again, the class and comp numbers, they're just not going to be in time for the budget process. So we have a placeholder COLA in there that we're hoping is going to be enough money for this process. Just so you know that we've thought about that. And if you see personnel costs going up, that's what that is. Oh yeah, go ahead.
And just to remember, a quick reminder, folks, more for the new people, we had a COLA freeze in 2020 because of the COVID situation. So we really have to do a decent cost of living raise this time.
Yeah, and we were required to do the cost of the class and comp study through the AFSCME contract. That was part of their bargained agreement. So we chose just to do for the whole city because that was easier. And then again, with the exception of police association, they are not going to be taken in consideration with the class and comp numbers. That was part of their bargaining. They get what they get and they're exempt from that. So that will be, those numbers will be set in stone for that. And then you'll see the new capital outlay line items for departments in there. And again, those were numbers that they provided us for schedules, for replacement for the future, so that we're not on a cliff every single year trying to replace servers or, you know, vehicles or whatever else. So they had to provide us with how much they needed to be allocated each year in order to make these initial investments in the future.
And thank goodness for ARPA, for all the
Yes.
the potholes we were able to fill.
Yes.
Awesome.
Next
Although
slide.
it wasn't really applicable for roads, so we didn't actually fill in
Yeah.
potholes.
Perhaps not.
For anybody who might be
potholes.
listening.
Yeah, good point.
And that's really all I have.
No, Katie, if I could, and I'm not going to gush too much, but I've been through a lot of budget presentations in my life. I've been to a number of municipal budget presentations. That is by far and away the best presentation I've ever seen on a municipal budget. And I just cannot thank you and the staff enough. In fact, I'm going to give you just full on. That was fantastic. No, I'm absolutely serious. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So maybe this is a whole can of worms, but I'm wondering if there will be discussion about the potholes that ARPA did fill. So I guess some like discussion or explaining about the money that we allotted from ARPA funds to city functions, how that changes the landscape of what's going on. So for instance, like buying the new financial software. We spent a whole bunch of money from ARPA on that, but what does that look like on the backside in terms of this is what we were paying for the system, this is what we're paying now, this is how much ARPA gave us back, those kinds of things. Like, I'm just curious about, and I know some of those things are new items, like the windows here is like a new item that isn't necessarily something that was already in a budget, but some of the things like like the financial systems or yeah, I just kind of want to understand how that impacts the whole landscape. And I'm sure that went into each of the departments, but I'm just curious around where that sets us compared to before the ARPA funds, and if that helps us along. Is that-
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can tell you just from the HVAC replacement alone that we had to do, that took up all of our contingency that we had in one of our funds. So we were able to replace that back, which was a huge thing. So yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, some things like the financial software, I mean, I don't know what we would have done. I mean, we would have had to probably do some sort of patchwork to keep it going because it's on its last leg. But I mean, whether or not we would have had the 400,000 investment. Oh, sorry.
Maybe a good data point on that one for Stephanie would be how much all of the other databases cost individually per year that are being replaced by just the one software system, because it's actually a savings.
Yeah, I guess, and
Oh,
that's kind
sure.
of what I'm talking about is, sort of like when you put a new roof on your house, you go, well, we spent all this money, but every year we're not having to spend this amount of money to patch it. And so what, sort of what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Would that also be a part of ARPA reporting? Will you be doing that anyway to the results of the money?
Yeah, we will be doing some
Okay,
parts of that
thank
too.
you.
So yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Katie,
Yeah.
there's probably not a measurable, something you can measure, but I'm sure you're saving time too. And, the
Yes.
ability for people to know exactly what's in they have to spend.
Yes. Yes, that it's a huge, yeah,
That
on
would be
all
a
of that.
huge saving.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Ted.
So when you said status quo on the materials and services, with materials going up big time and gas prices going up big time, has that been considered, or is it gonna be less than what materials and services that we had before, since it's gonna be a status quo?
So some of those line items like fuel, that was one of the things they had asked for to be increased. So that one, we knew we weren't gonna be able to get by with what we had budgeted last year. Other line items like office supplies or some of those, we're just asking them, hey, try and live within the same budget you had last year. We know the price of things are going up and we know that that may not be totally possible, but a lot of the things that they knew that they were going to be buying or contracts that were going up, they told us and we increased those. But otherwise, if not, we're just asking them to buy less if they can.
One of the things that we did to expedite this process was we invented a thing called a budget change request notice. And departments had to fill out BCRs as a fillable PDF for any line item they desired to shift to show those increases in materials, gasoline, what have you. They submitted those. We reviewed them. In the majority of cases, we found them to be accurate and truthful. And therefore, those are where the shifts came from, is from the BCRs.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? All right, you guys are gonna get some of your night
I
back.
guess I got one more.
All right.
Is it gonna be a public, where it's gonna be on Zoom?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yep.
Okay, anything else?
Sue has a question.
So just to explain, there's a lot of confusion over the hybrid environment now. There was a law passed that requires that we provide comment for public hearings virtually in Oregon, but we do more than that here at the city. We have all of our meetings that are in this room hybrid, so they're all on Zoom. There's a one-stop shop resources page for the budget that has all of the individual links. People can also find it on our website under the agendas and minutes page, which just kind of lists the meetings by order by date. All of the Zoom links and agendas for all of the meetings are up. Katie and her team have done a cracking job sorry, I'm sounding British now. Crack on, spot on. It's catching. I've caught myself the other day saying crikey. at home. So anyway, those are all up, Ted. And then we have amended our public comment form because we went back into person and decided not to do the virtual web form anymore, which we did not like the format of. So I actually have it, the budget committees this year are going to be blue.
Very nice.
I was gonna go with green for the color of money, but I thought maybe that was,
A little too
Um,
much.
And then if people email, the city recorder email, it goes to either myself or Zaira Robles Munoz, who's my assistant. And then we will let them know if they want to do virtual, they just have to check a box and we'll send them the information. If they want to come in person, then we'll register them. We'll also have these forms out at the next meeting, which is next Wednesday. I will be on vacation, but Zaira will be here. So, the other thing about the budget, you will get your physical copies Friday. I will also get a physical copy, because we posted online on the one-stop shop page, the financial resources. But we also have a physical copy. Anybody who wants to make an appointment during City Hall's opens hours can come in and ask to see the budget. So hopefully that was not too much rambling. Thank you.
You know, so I appreciate the blue. I'm just, if we ever see Black Watch tartan as a color on the thing, Black Watch, I'm sorry, sir.
Nope,
Any
nope.
tartan?
I think it's time to adjourn the meeting.
That would be Argyle and Sutherland Highlander, not Black Watch.
Okay.
Wrong regiment.
Uh-oh. Unless there's anything more before the fisticuffs come out.
Yeah.
We're adjourned. Thank you very much, guys.
Yes, thank you.